And how did you feel with these performances done for you almost in person? I mean, it's
I felt
sort of
regal.
royal.
I felt regal. I felt you were joking about the throne. I mean, it became slightly nervous making habitual, didn't it? Yeah, it was utterly extraordinary, and it wasn't only that there was this special performance for me. We were saying after we stepped outside just now into the Abbey. The Abbey now looks like a bazaar. Everybody piled in, tourists, whatever. We had the privilege of these buildings where we were alone. And they are so powerful. Just entering King's College Chapel, entering this place, going into St Paul's, that vast space, and you're there, and nothing else.
And it's a monarch's eye view. You have
it's a monarch's eye view.
Because to hear that music a few
played
places
to
away
you.
from it,
Played to you.
Did you know already a lot about Henry V, for instance,
No.
being a composer?
No, I did not. It was, again, this was a series where I found myself doing more original research for the series than I'd ever done before. Because clearly, I know the royal history very well.
Yeah.
I only knew the musical history. To give a little musical quote, from Mikado, in shreds and batches. I only knew bits and pieces of it. And the great challenge for Peter and I was to work out an overall structure. It was fascinating. We met James O'Donnell just now, and he said, "No one's quite done this before, not even the musicologists." So in that sense, this is the most original piece of, patting myself firmly on the head, the most original piece of television I've done.
How did it feel to listen to Henry VIII's compositions?
Those I knew.
Really?
Those I knew. Yes, I mean it was particularly interesting listening to them as they were performed at Haddon Hall, because again those are interiors that are very, very close to the rooms where they would have been performed in, and you got a real striking sense of the resonance, particularly when you were dealing with the more raucous music, with the use of the shawm, unbelievably loud. They were actually called haute in French, meaning loud. My God, are they? There was that sense. There was that sense of the raucousness, of the dance music of the court and whatever. It's a dance band, and intensely rhythmical. We tend to soften all this so that it becomes, it becomes very hey nonny no. But this is seduction music. This is syncopated. It's quite extraordinary. Not what you think.
And what about on the music side? Are you musical yourself?
In the most moderate way. I had a highly musical mother who tried to make me play the piano, and it was a catastrophe. Trying to make me do anything is a catastrophe, and I now bitterly regret. But I hope I've got a bit of sensitivity about it.
Did you take any music exams then, or?
Yes, I did. But I played it exactly like a typewriter, with all the sensitivity. Yes, I got to quite a high grade, but without any. I think the piano is a lethal instrument to practice on because you don't develop your ear, unless you're really well taught.
So coming across those scores, how did you find that? I mean, I suppose you had your experts with you, didn't you?
I had all my experts, but I can work out the shape. And again, you see, I thought it was very important. So often television is de haut en bas, expert, talking to mass audience. It was for me. I've always resisted in my history programs having other historians with me. Because A, I think it confuses, and B, I remember those dreadful Tim Gardam time watches where you put 4 historians in a room to talk about the Civil War. It was like a really bad-tempered news night. And you emerged knowing absolutely nothing about the Civil War at all. But all of these people slagging each other. It can be good, very good television, but it's slagging off. And it's not very interesting. Whereas this was completely different because our relationship was one of respect, there's respect for each other's expertise, and we could talk to each other without competition. I mean, there were quite a few moments when it wasn't only that they taught me something, I was able to say, because of my knowledge. You see, so you were asking what I knew. I am the expert on the royal court. I mean, highly technical stuff, which of course is central to how the Chapel Royal works, how religion weaves into the general pattern of royal ceremony. So, and what happened with the musicologists of this period, they've begun to realise just how absolutely central context is to music. Who commissions it, how, for what, and so on. So we were able A, to hit it off, but B, I think, to have a mutually interesting conversation, which is what I hope comes over in the snippets we've used.
And did you feel you had to do a different type of programme for the BBC than you would have done for Channel 4?
Not at all. I mean, I have some principles when I make television. The first is that I'm paid adequately. I've never believed in working for nothing. The labourer is worthy of his hire. But I believe that it is possible to be as accurate, as creative, and as imaginative in making television as in writing the most serious academic book. You can apply the same principles of scholarship and accuracy. And I think I can fairly say every word that goes on screen I have written.
Absolutely.
And I believe this passionately. I think the presenter simply as mouthpiece is a disaster. It's cheating. It's cheating. And I think I think that there's been a softening of my style, and I hope there has since the early days of Channel 4. It's less hectoring. I let my hair grow longer, and with all those musicians in competition with great floppy-haired musicians and whatever, well, let it all hang out a bit more. I hope it was a bit more relaxed.
Yes, I think so. I mean, so what drew you to the BBC? Was it this project?
No,
nothing.
nothing.
Channel 4
showed
you the door? Or
no, Channel 4 did not. That relationship has just quietly expired. It's been like an old soldier, it didn't die, it just faded away. Again, you see, I did have a friend at court. Janice Hadler was my first editor at Channel 4, and of course now BBC 2. But the genesis of the programme is genuinely what Jan and I described it as being. It happened at the British the British Library. It was the opening of my exhibition, my quincentennial exhibition for Henry VIII in 2009, and obviously I gave the opening talk naturally. And one of the things that I highlighted was, of course, the contribution of the British Library's own unbelievable manuscript resources to it, which are particularly strong in music. They have all the key Henry VIII musical documents. And so I talked about those for a few moments, and Jan, there's a programme there, let's do something on Henry before he starts cutting the heads of his wives off. But then we discovered there was a very intimate connection between the cutting off the heads of the wives and what happened to the music. So, there's a really driving political narrative to this, politico-religious narrative to it. Which I think complements the dynamism of the music.
You mentioned your own memories of the coronation. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit and how that affected you.
I was a little boy. I was aged 8, and I was, of course, in those days, little boys wore short trousers, but they had sort of neatly pressed suits, and we were all in our collars and ties because he didn't on the whole wear open neck shirts, except on the promenade at Morecambe and on the beach when you were allowed to. Otherwise, we were all gathered in our next door neighbour's house. They were semi-detached council houses, and our next door neighbour, my mother disapproved of her passionately, because she was a loose woman, and indeed she was very, very effectively, and she got off with a local businessman, which was why they could afford a television. And there was this very large pie console model. You're all far too young to remember these things, but they looked like a sort of 50s cocktail cabinet. And they stood about this high, and they had doors that opened, so the doors were ceremonially open. Then you had this tiny little 14-inch screen in the middle of the thing, and this faintly bluish black and white image. David Dimbleby and I were chatting about this last night, and he, of course, is making a program on the coronation using his father's text for the coronation. And as he was describing, that the very smallness of the box, the very smallness of this little view, it produced a kind of sense that you were being let into a great mystery. It was like spying. And then there was this extraordinary spectacle. Have you ever seen a film of the coronation?
I haven't actually.
You really ought to. It is one of the world's great spectaculars. And there's a wonderful colour film.
Yes, you'll see some of that in the
You'll see some of it. But here there is this, the Queen was strikingly attractive at that point. She's 25, much of the time clad in white. It's like a great act of sacrifice. Alone, because of course the Duke is not consort, he's not crowned with her. So she's alone with all of these extraordinary old men wearing the weirdest things and these extraordinary actions. It's really hieratic. It's sort of Harry Potter on speed. It's very. It left the most abiding memory. I suspect it's at the basis of the fact that all of my professional career has been based around history of monarchy and aristocracy, and that, of course, and being fed up with living in a northern council house.
Could you name some of the composers that you focus on in the first episode, and what made
Well,
them
the only really key the key composer in the first episode is Dunstable. We look at some of the figures who surround him. I mean, they're semi-anonymous, aren't they? They're the figures, in the old Hall manuscript, and there are only two collections surviving. There's the old Hall and there's the Eton Choir book. And so they are the composers there that we're really trying. But what we're really trying to do there is to set up. It's not so much the individual music, individual pieces, though many of them are absolutely magnificent and beautiful. But it's the particular pattern of music and the role of the Chapel Royal and the scale of the royal commitment, the size of this enterprise, the investment in this enterprise, and then to use the Reformation to present the story of the break with Palace and so on.
Yes, which is in the first episode as well.
Which
so
is
the
in the
first
first
one
episode.
goes up to
It goes up to Elizabeth. It goes up to Elizabeth.
And that's before the 20th century. That's the golden age of English church music in particular. It's the Salisbury and Burt, so that's all.
But again, golden only within the walls of the Chapel Royal. That outside there is this completely different world, and we tend to think of Elizabeth as, because of the way she's been built up, as all powerful. Actually, royal power is very circumscribed in all sorts of areas, and over the church, she wisely decides to leave most of her subjects effectively to worship in the way they want, providing they allow her to worship in the way that she wants. The catastrophe that happens with Charles I and Laud is when a monarchy which actually lacks key instruments of coercion, remember there's no standing army, no police force, tries to impose its will on the country with these disastrous consequences. But music, and again this is a point we're making all the time, music is the centre of the old monarchy, of the pre-Reformation monarchy. Music is the centre of the Elizabethan monarchy. Music is at the absolute heart of the battles of the Civil War. It's not just an add-on, it's not just... And what we've forgotten, and again I think it's something that it would be very wise to focus on, we've forgotten just how central music was to education. All of our monarchs are seriously musically trained. The first monarch who is not musical is George V, which would surprise nobody. But right up to that point, music is absolutely central to education. Plays a key role. And almost all of them are executants, they're good performers. George III is an excellent harpsichord player.
Did you have any call to contact the palace about any of the music that you chose, or?
No, I had
Is
no
there any-
direct role in that. We had a superb music producer, Caroline Page, who did, I think, as you can see and hear, a most wonderful job. I mean, the programme, is so complex. And I'm also a believer in television that each person does their own job. I'm words man. No, seriously. And I think that actually works very well. You concentrate, he's picture chap, but he's also got to think about the music. And Caroline was music woman, and it works really well. You have to trust each other's expertise. You to be prepared to work cooperatively. Okay, the certain dominant elements in the partnership, which are obvious, but I think I was prepared to take direction at the time. No, I mean, when it comes to a matter of performance, I think I'm a lamb, aren't I? I mean, I do what you tell me.
You are a kitten, though.
Yeah. With this dreadful business of removing claws, yes, I have to regrow my nails at the end of each programme. Yes.
Given what you've just said about monarchs all being trained in music, which would you say, which monarch has been the most talented?
Henry V clearly is one. Then it's Henry VIII. It's Elizabeth. I mean,
Really?
both of them are seriously good executants. I mean, they're very, very good. Henry VIII composes. He's all right.
Yeah.
And apparently musical opinion is now revising him upwards rather than downwards. But he's able to compose a five-part mass. Which ain't bad.
Yeah.
I think most students doing a musical degree nowadays would rather balk at that. At the same time that he's being a star athlete, running the country, writing poetry, and supervising astonishing architectural constructions. These were polymathic people. And Elizabeth, she uses music as an absolute element in her competition with Mary Queen of Scots and so on. Her ability at the harpsichord, which apparently is staggering, because of course she has this enormous reach. She has these huge, long fingers. So you get the Scots ambassador, effectively having to have a command performance thrust at him, as she's sort of saying, who's the tallest, who's the thisest, who's the thatest, and then finally this great flurry of the harpsichord. Who can do a chord like that?
So I should just say that we've got until 1:45, so we've got sort of another 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay. Of all the music you heard, was there anything in particular that completely blew you away?
Oh yes, I mean the Handel played here and at St Paul's, and played as it was played, is simply extraordinary. I thought again that the early 20th century stuff, that we had a wonderful performance of Jerusalem. We had the performed
Holston St Paul's and
Yes,
about
yes.
my country.
Which
Oh.
episode is it, Jerusalem?
pardon.
That's in the fourth.
Yeah. We also had, we used a place that will be not familiar to any of you, which is Stationers' Hall, which is one of the grand new buildings put up in London after the Great Fire. And it was the principal musical venue for Purcell's last works and for early Handel. And listening, for example, to the birthday ode for Queen Anne, the thing that was sung at the Olympics and whatever,
Okay, yeah.
there. That was, wasn't it? That one of the most absolutely extraordinary moments.
And again, it's a piece of music. It's "Eternal Source of Light Divine" is the famous bit that you hear on adverts and so on. And hearing that sung in a room just for an audience of one, which you did, which is how it was originally performed. It was written for Queen Anne's birthday in 1714. And David was being Queen Anne.
With no effort at all.
But it's quite a privilege, isn't it?
It was
Very
deeply so. It
marvellous
was deeply
sopranos.
so. It was deeply so. And again, the experience of also watching music making, all the choirs that we dealt with were splendid, but the one, as it were, where you saw the most intellectual engagement by the participants was when we were at Eton. And that was very remarkable. I mean, the boy who sang the descant, he was the kind of person who makes you sick of of Etonians. You know, whilst he
You're
was
in the country,
whilst he was doing this, he was at the same time hiding under the ledge, doing his Greek prep. You just wanted it.
What about the level of royal patronage for music now? Is that increasing? I mean, you mentioned Maria Miller in there, of course. It's so controversial at the moment about arts funding.
Well, I mean, I think
royals
what,
stepping into the breach.
what I think there's been a very interesting revival of interest and concern and musicality with Prince Charles. I mean, Prince Charles is a good musician. You know, he's an executant. He plays the cello. He is very closely associated with the expert on early 20th century music, Jeremy Dibble, that we use. They're friends. He chose the music for the wedding of his son and daughter-in-law. He talked Kate through it, and a great deal of this early 20th century music, especially Paris, was very heavily featured in that. What I think is the great problem is what has happened to the so-called serious music tradition. Hardly any of the music is really usable for the sort of purposes that it has to be used. And it is very striking how those early 20th century composers, as it were, accepted the constraints of royal composition and produced masterpieces with it. You know, Paris, I was glad, I think often Paris is a very boring composer, but you know, that is electrifying, absolutely electrifying. And yet, as I was saying to you when we were talking about the manuscripts, you can see just how absolutely it's written to a brief. Frederick Bridge, who was the organist here and was responsible for the coronation, so he had the tightest rein on the composers and whatever because these are the first coronations where there's evidence of real rigour in the mounting of the ceremony and precise organisation and whatever.
It's really choreographed.
It's really choreographed to the last detail, extensive rehearsal and so on, which most artists nowadays would regard as an intolerable constraint, but it produces some of the very greatest music.
But also, one of the things you argue in the service is that what we see now, you know, what we've just seen last year with the service for the Diamond Jubilee and what we expect from royal weddings and funerals, that all really comes from 1902, doesn't it?
It's 1902 to 1911. It's those coronations. It's the beginning of the House of Windsor, and it's one of those extraordinary moments at which a nation really reinvents a religion. It's royal religion. It's English Shinto. The English worshipping themselves, which always seem to be very sensible, through the monarchy, as you know, Japanese emperor and real Shinto.
I think we might have to draw it to a close. Does anybody have any last questions?
Just briefly, you mentioned sort of the popular tastes of Elgar and the little clip we saw there, and Henry VIII is the pop star king. I was wondering if you had any interest in sort of more popular modern responses to the monarchy.
No, this is not. I'm allergic to all of that, and it seems to me to be. It's silly for me to do something that I'm not interested in, and to pretend to do it. Somebody else can do that, and somebody else should do that. You know, the peculiar phenomenon of the sanctified monarch listening to a concert with earplugs seems to me to be something that is in urgent need of exploration. Yes.
That won't be.
Yeah. And there's all of that too. Yes. I mean, the relationship of monarchy to popular culture is a very odd one, but somebody else needs to explore that. I'm not the person to do it, I fear.
And are you quite competitive as a sort of TV historian? Say, if you know, when Lucy Worsley's programme came out, did you go, gosh, I wish I'd done that?
I've never seen Lucy. What,
It's on BBC Two.
It's on BBC Two. No, I'm not particularly. I mean, Simon Sharma and I, we go back 40 odd years. We were near contemporaries at Cambridge. But no, I mean, we've never had a public argument about things. We all have our own styles. History is a house of many mansions. And it seems to me there appears to be room for all of us. Why not? I really am very unprescriptive when it comes to this. Clearly, people prefer one to the other, but that's fine. The only thing that worries me at all is whether the history that's on television is any good or not.
Yes, I mean, and you've been critical of history and education previously, haven't you? I mean, it strikes me, even with things like horrible histories, that TV is taking a more important role.
I think that's true. And I think, in fact, what I would say is it's beginning to take a more important, an important role even vis-à-vis the universities, that as history becomes more and more narrowly technical. I mean, the debate that I had on the Andrew Neil programme with Richard Evans, the Regis at Cambridge, he says effectively that history is a professional possession. It's owned by historians, and that it's an analytical formula. That seems to me to be absurd, as well as being a shocking piece of trade unionism. But the way history is being taught in schools is sort of pseudo-professionalism. The children are taught now primarily, it isn't real, of course, it's all synthetic, source analysis and that kind of thing, whereas they're left with absolutely no sense of the broad brush of time, development in time, how we root ourselves in time, how patterns of broad change have occurred. Whereas, history is dying when it's taught like that. On television and in publication, is it thriving? Of course it is. But then you see, the universities have never really been the centres of our intellectual life.
No, and there's not much English history taught, is there?
There's very little in English history
I mean, my
taught.
son's GCSE syllabus, half of it is American history.
Yeah, it's American. Weird subjects like the history of medicine, entirely unsuitable for teaching to young people because they've no idea of context. No idea of contextualisation. I mean, Gove's proposals are the most awful mixed bag. The idea that you can teach the Anglo-Saxons to sort of 6-year-olds or whatever is ludicrous. There is a way you can do it, and in Dream School, once we got past our little ruckus, we actually got there rather well because I used the model of bling and rap. I mean, if you actually look at the Anglo-Saxon warrior aristocracy, they look like every lad in Brixton. A cult of male violence combined with immensely elaborate jewellery display. It's very. But the values, the values of current black culture are practically identical to those of a warrior aristocracy. Respect is honour. Your bitch is how women were treated. You see what I mean? They're classic forms of male culture.
So what should Michael Gove be doing now then?
Well, I think he's brought
Short question.
Which will get a rather long answer, but which we haven't got time for. No. I mean, he should stick to the idea of history as chronology. He should hold to his guns on the business of focus on British history, but he should work out how to do it better. Again, very interestingly, Nigel Saul, the medievalists have been very good on this. Nigel Saul at Royal Holloway and David Abulafia at Cambridge both said that they thought that for the earlier periods, and particularly the medieval, probably a strong thematic element would help, and I felt that very strongly when I was doing Dream School. The most successful programme there was religion, oddly. When we burned a heretic, they loved it. And what was particularly interesting, I gave them a wonderfully gruesome description. What was wonderful was one of these louts actually managed to burn himself as we were burning it, this great thug. The howls as this tiny little burn on his finger. So one was able to say, well, what would it be like if your whole body was like that? Why would you do it? It was completely voluntary. You walked to the stake just because you would not swear. But the one thing that's really good about Gove, and I've had a lot of problems with Gove because of his cheerleading for Blair, the Iraq War, and New Labour and neocon and all this. The really good thing about Michael is that he's recognised that what education should be about is what these people thought education was about, which is the communication of the best of the past to the present in order that we can build something better for the future. This is what the Renaissance was about. Chaucer understands it right at the beginning. Old books from which new learning springs. And once you lose that sense, of the communication of this body of learning and knowledge. Education just becomes a series of fragments, and he's at least got that.